to today's discussion of the role of oral history in historical research. My name is Nathan Hillanbrand, and I'll be your host. Before I tell you how oral history helped and complicated researching my German Mennonite ancestors here in southeastern Pennsylvania, we need to ask a more basic question. What is oral history exactly? Human beings have always passed on historical knowledge through spoken accounts. The difference between that kind of oral tradition, or regular everyday storytelling, and the modern research method of oral history is that oral historians ask targeted questions. Oral historians transcribe and archive the whole conversation so that every memory that comes up and the exact way that those memories were told is preserved for future use by other historians long after the fact. Another hallmark of oral history is that both sides of the conversation are thought of as doing history. So instead of having a narrator and a listener, as in traditional storytelling, or an interviewer and an interviewee, as in journalistic reporting, in oral history, there's a narrator and an interviewer. But how does that actually work? How is oral history properly used within an academic research project? Is it more or less reliable than sources written after the fact? Or is that even a valid question? There are many such questions being discussed in the scholarly literature. Is the point of oral history just to add color to the story? Or is it a genuine tool of the historical trade? Can historians use anonymous sources? Well, no, we really can't. And that means that interviewers have to limit themselves to what narrators are willing to put on the permanent record. Which is more real, history or memory? Is oral history mainly about filling in gaps in conventional history? Or is it a more authentic kind of history altogether? Are narrator memories reliable? How much stock should we put in oral tradition or secondhand stories? Research has shown time and time again that we unconsciously alter our memories and tell fictions when we mean to tell the truth. Just because a narrator is trustworthy does not mean that he is correct. How much should I, as the interviewer, be involved in shaping the narrator's story? Should I fill in details when I can? Or am I already corrupting the person's memory by what questions I ask to begin with? What are my ethical obligations as an interviewer? How do I avoid causing harm with my questions, or with the information that is revealed? How do I maintain the integrity of the interview? What if my narrator slanders someone? What about narrator reticence? That is, if a narrator avoids a subject, how much should the interviewer then try to pin him down? How do we balance pursuing the truth with respecting narrators' wishes about their personal information? Is it better to be close to the narrator or an objective stranger? On the one hand, narrators are less likely to open up to people they do not know well. However, interviewers should be aware that if narrators are comfortable, they will often share things that they did not mean to share. This is where discretion on the part of the historian is of paramount importance. What if these conversations bring up painful memories, or change perception of the past for the worse? Defining the boundaries of the conversation can help to avoid bringing up irrelevant, harmful information. I gained a better understanding of this surprisingly complicated discipline by diving in. The little town where I've lived my whole life, Skippack, was the second German town to be established here. The first was just named Germantown. My area, the Delaware Valley of southeastern Pennsylvania, was heavily settled by Germans in colonial times. It was here that the first Mennonite community in America was established. I had just spent the past 8 weeks studying this population to write up a tour for a preserved property here from 1706. And I was eager to look into my own Pennsylvania German ancestors with my new skills of oral history interviewing and archival research. But what role was oral history going to play in this project? It would seem that oral history is almost a necessity for local history, because local history is, of course, generally not concerned with events on which there is widespread knowledge. Instead, it usually relies on the memory of local people and on local buildings. Since my great-grandmother on my mother's father's side, Mary Emma Wismer Kolb, lived to be almost 100, I actually knew her. I called her great-gran. And I knew a few things about her background. I knew that she was lonely on the farm, that she went to business school, married a non-Mennonite, and became a Presbyterian. I also knew that there had been a Mennonite bishop in this family line in the distant past. As a child, I thought of this farm as some faraway place, so it was quite a surprise, driving up the main street of the little town where my parents had moved, when my great-grandmother said, "Oh, I used to ride my bike along here as a little girl." My parents looked into it at the time, but didn't get very far with their various attempts to find properties, genealogical records, and grave sites. I was eager to try to solve the puzzle years later with my historical training. Of course, I interviewed my mother first.
You need Mennonite details? I only have one. My grandmother was baptized in the Perkiomen Creek at age 7 in November, and it was cold.
My first interview appeared to be a complete bust. Little did I know that that one sentence would save my project. I figured I would be deluged with information when I interviewed my grandfather, so I called him to just ask a few initial questions to help me know where I was going with my research. I was disappointed when he said he actually didn't know very much about her childhood, and then shocked when he told me that he thought her mother died when she was young, and she was then raised by her stepmother. Her own mother had passed away in 1930, when Great-Gran was already in her mid-20s, and I didn't see any record anywhere of Abraham A. Wismer remarrying. My mother had never heard of any stepmother, but my grandfather quickly produced primary source evidence, a detailed trip record from 1960. Apparently, on the way to their Niagara Falls honeymoon, he and my grandmother stopped on November 13th in East Harrisburg, PA, to see Grammy Wismer. "Did you know this person?" I asked. "Not really," he said. "My mother asked me to visit her. I thought it was her stepmother." I then asked what he knew about the creek baptism, but he did not remember ever hearing his mother talk about that. It looked like oral history might not be that helpful after all. Faced with conflicting information from family members and the first layer of records, I headed right to the Mennonite Heritage Center and asked what they had on the Wismer family. But despite the enormous amount of material held at this archive, there wasn't anything on this branch of the Wismer family after Abraham K. Wismer. When I mentioned in passing to the archives collections manager, Joel Aldifer, that my great-grandmother was baptized in the Perkiomen Creek at age 7, he said, "Well, if you're telling me that she was creek baptized, and at such a young age, then your people must have been river brethren." So, the reason I was hitting a wall was that a minority of Mennonites kept splitting off into various different groups over the years. I theorized that Abraham A. Wismer, great-grand's father, neither stayed with the old Mennonites nor joined the Brethren in Christ, aka the River Brethren, but rather a hybrid group, the Mennonite Brethren in Christ. A cassette tape recording of great-grand's niece confirmed my theory.
Well, it was Mennonite Brethren in Christ it was called, MB&C. Now it's called Bible Fellowship.
Joel was able to point me to a local historian who solved the mystery of the disappearance of the church that my great-great and great-great-great-grandfather had built. Jill drove me to the location, which now houses the Graterford Bible Fellowship, and we went in. There was the original structure hiding in plain sight. The new sanctuary had actually been built around it. The part of the room with the lower ceiling is the original rectangular church facing the raised pulpit, now sectioned off as a closet. I was even more excited when Jill took me to the nearby stone dam where the Graterford baptisms were done. The park where I played as a child was the site of my great-grandmother's baptism. But was she really only 7 years old? The Mennonites did not keep baptismal records, Providentially, Jill had done a phone interview with my great-grandmother for the 1992 church centennial. Great-grand said that Pastor Kratz baptized me and it was the most vivid experience of my spiritual life. Pastor Kratz served the Graterford Church from 1911 to 1914, making my great-grandmother 6 years old when he came. But it was Pastor Hefner who performed my marriage. As the November part of our story being accurate, Jill's book states, "In the earlier days of our church, people thought you should be baptized as soon as you were saved, and they would break the ice to do it. However, they later changed to seasonal baptisms." The transcript from Jill's 1993 interview with 77-year-old Wilmer Reinford, a traditional Mennonite who lived in the area, further describes what a Mennonite Brethren in Christ creek baptism in the early 20th century would have looked like. Mr. Reinford recounted the pastor using a pole to check the creek bottom for rocks sticking out dangerously. He said, "A crowd had gathered to watch the baptism, and a fellow yelled from the bridge, in German, 'Is he going to stamp out the whole creek?'" Later in the same interview, Mr. Reinford made a passing comment which confirmed that Abraham K. Wismer was the first of my lineage to leave the old Mennonite church. Oral history, both new and old interviews, were helping me fit the puzzle pieces together. These finds are a great example of how oral history transcripts have much value beyond the immediate investigation they were created for. These were not details relevant to Jill's book, but they were highly relevant for me. So now it was time to do my own interviews. So what do you know about your parents' actual marriage in 1930? Where was it performed and who was...
The only thing that I know about, and I've heard this, and obviously I wasn't here so I don't know, but the only thing that I know is that I think my father was sick at the time, and he may have, I believe he may have had some malaria of some sort that he may have contacted. As far as the wedding was concerned, it was, as far as I know, it was upstairs in the bedroom, and that was the wedding.
They had planned to have the wedding at the Wismer farm, but my great-grandfather didn't want to postpone the wedding, so Pastor Hefner apparently came into the city and performed the ceremony at my great-grandfather's sickbed. I would never have put that whole story together without these oral histories. Of course, I wanted to know why there wasn't a huge uproar in the family when my great-grandmother became a Presbyterian. I had read about the development of the evangelical Mennonite groups and that they were very similar to other kinds of American evangelicals. But what did this similarity actually mean for people at the time? My grandfather reported that he had always thought of himself as Presbyterian from an early age. He recalled frequent visits to his Uncle Ezra's Mennonite Brethren in Christ church, and said that those services seemed basically the same as the ones at his Presbyterian church. This gave me a better idea of what the secondary sources meant when they described the Mennonite Brethren in Christ's assimilation into American evangelicalism. My grandfather knew that he was Presbyterian and thought of his relatives as Mennonites, but there was hardly any difference between the two churches. My great-uncle had similar memories of Uncle Ezra's church as my grandfather did. However, he recounted that as a child, he was concerned about whether his baptism as an infant by sprinkling in the Presbyterian church really counted or not. And at age 11, he asked to have a Mennonite baptism by immersion in a swimming pool. Now, Grammy Wismer finally came into view. Being the oldest child, Uncle Jack had actually known her and could give personal details.
Anna Wismer would make me graham crackers with butter and molasses, what they call that, caro syrup, I guess it was. And she lectured to me, I should never forget her. She lectured about one's body being the temple of the living God and how one should be very, very careful what one does with it. They both were very religious. When you left, you knelt and prayed.
What I learned from all these experiences was that while on its own oral history can be as problematic as it is helpful, the details, and even the inconsistencies that it brings out, can propel conventional research to the next level and open up new avenues of investigation. There was one detail, however, that all narrators agreed on from the beginning. I had learned this story as a child, when I had asked my mother why the hymn we were singing in church was making her cry happy tears. She whispered that this was our family hymn, and after the service I asked why. After many years of faithful service, my great-great-grandfather, Deacon Abraham Allebuck Wismer, surrounded by his loving family in his final moments, asked them to sing the classic hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," as he peacefully departed this life to join the heavenly chorus above.